Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 5, the cardiovascular system. This system, in some ways, is a little bit easier because it's a lot of labeling and processing and thinking about the flow of the blood and less about just kind of, minuscule kind of details. So let's hit it. All right, so the function of the cardiovascular system, let's just start with what you know. You know that the heart is beating and there's some vessels and there's fluid in your vessels. So essentially, one of the functions of the cardiovascular system is to transport materials. So we're taking oxygen to the cells and nutrients. We're transporting immune cells, a variety of white blood cells, some that are on-demand white blood cells, right there ready to disinfect, for example, if you cut yourself. And then hormones are also taken to the cells. Well, the other part of it is picking up stuff. So we pick up the carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of cellular respiration. We also pick up waste products from metabolism. So the blood is really, on one side of it, full of lots of really great things, and on the other side of it is picking up the waste products. The other thing that the cardiovascular system is going to do is it is going to transport, essentially, lymphatic fluids. So you might have heard of like your lymph nodes, and when your lymph nodes are swollen, it kind of gives you an idea that maybe you're fighting off an infection in the area of those nodes. Essentially, what's happening with the lymphatic system or the lymph is that it's going to collect extra fluid. So essentially what happens is as we're sending blood down the tiniest of vessels, and we're dropping off the oxygen and picking up the CO2 and dropping off the nutrients and picking up the waste products, there's also essentially some fluids that can accumulate between the cells. We call that fluid interstitial fluid. So the lymphatic system is essentially going to pick up the excess interstitial fluid, and the blood is going to be carrying that extra fluid. Okay. Another huge function of the cardiovascular system is in homeostasis. So maybe you haven't really had to think about it too much, but when it's really warm outside, maybe you've noticed that the vessels on your hands and your legs, they essentially become more noticeable. And what's happening in those moments is that essentially these blood vessels, which these that you're seeing are our veins, are dilating and getting bigger, and there's more volume of blood going to your extremities. So if we're sending more blood to the extremities, and technically, the skin is going to be a cooling surface. So we can cool off the body temperature or lower the body temperature by cooling the blood. Now, when it's cold outside, you might have noticed that it's harder to see those veins. In fact, if you wear any kind of rings, you might notice that they twirl in the winter, and that's essentially because these veins are going to constrict, and they are going to not have as much blood flowing through them, definitely adequate amounts, but we're not trying to lose heat. So essentially they constrict, and we hold more of that warm blood at any given point in time in the veins of our visceral cavity. Okay, so essentially we're trying to keep the organs warm. And so in this sense, our blood vessels are playing a role in body temperature and maintaining homeostasis. There are three other things there: pH balance, water, and electrolyte levels, which are super, super important. You might have remembered that we talked about buffers before. So essentially, the blood and the cardiovascular system are going to be super important to maintaining homeostasis of those particular properties. Okay, so our cardiovascular system essentially has the heart, the pump, it has vessels, and then essentially it has really what we're thinking about is the blood. The heart is a double pump, so it is at any given point in time pumping blood not only to your lungs, but also to your body. The heart is made up of a particular type of muscle. You already know this, it's cardiac muscle, and it is called myocardium. When you see myo, this root word, you're going to think heart. Okay, so the double pump. Okay, moving on. So in this figure, and I rearranged some of the figures in this PowerPoint so that you can get the visual quickly after the verbal and written descriptions. So here we have our heart here in the center, and you see that it has vessels that are blue, vessels that are red. We will come back to that. But essentially what we see here are the lungs. So there is part of this pump that is literally just taking blood, and I will name it the lower right chamber of the heart, right ventricle, is going to take blood to the lungs, right and left lungs. It's going to drop off the carbon dioxide. You will exhale that carbon dioxide. You are always inhaling and exhaling. As we are inhaling, we have fresh O2. Oxygen is going to enter the capillaries of the lungs, and it makes its way back to the heart. And this is the left atrium, the top chamber of the left side of the heart. Now we see that there is another whole circuit. And this circuit goes from the heart out the aorta. It says head and arms. It also goes in branches descends, and it goes to the lower abdomen, the legs, the toes, and then all that blood returns back to the right atrium, the right upper chamber. So at any given moment, blood is both being pumped to the lungs, where O2 is being picked up, CO2 is being dropped off, and it's also pumping blood to the body. So upper extremities and your head, your abdominal cavity, your legs and your toes. And when it's going out to the body, it is dumping off the oxygen and picking up the CO2. All right, so let's get familiar with the three types of vessels that we're using in the cardiovascular system, and then some subtypes thereof, if you will. So we have our arteries. Take a look at this micrograph, or essentially this is a view of a microscope slide through a microscope. And here the little a means artery, here the little v means vein. Arteries are fairly thick-walled. Now, when we think about our three types of muscle tissue, skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, doesn't take much elimination there to realize it's not associated with the skeleton, it's not associated with the heart. So this is smooth muscle. So take a look. There's a very well-defined, rather large area of the wall of the artery that's made up of smooth muscle. And there's going to be a reason why, so we'll come back to that. Take a look at the vein. It also is going to have some smooth muscle, but overall the vein, while it can be much larger, it actually has a smaller wall, so a smaller amount of smooth muscle tissue. Then we have the teeny tiniest of all the vessels called capillaries. And we see that the capillaries essentially are connecting arteries to veins. So capillaries allow for a single file line of red blood cells to move through it. And it is during that time that we're dropping off the oxygen that's bound to the hemoglobin in the red blood cell and picking up the CO2. Also during that time, we are going to be picking up waste products, dropping off all that good stuff like nutrients and hormones. So that's happening at the capillaries. So a little bit more about arteries. So the word arteries starts with the letter A. Arteries always carry blood away from the heart. No matter what color we see them or any of that, just remember arteries carry blood away from the heart. Usually arteries are under high pressure. Now you notice they had a well-defined, thicker layer of smooth muscle. And in general, arteries, except for the major artery of the heart, of the body, the aorta, they are going to be somewhat smaller, and so they are under high pressure. So the smooth muscle and the elastic tissue that's involved in the construction of the walls of the artery are going to allow the arteries basically to expand as blood is moving out the heart and pulsating, if you will, through the body. It's going to allow those arteries to expand and then recoil, which is going back to their original state. Some examples of arteries in our bodies: the aorta, the largest of all arteries, carries blood directly out of the heart in an arch, and it's going to divide to take blood up to the arms and the brain, and it's going to descend and take blood to the lower abdominal cavity, as well as your legs and your feet. So there's some other ones, the carotid arteries, the major arteries that are essentially delivering blood to the brain, and they branch off here in your neck. And some other ones there, basically named similarly to the bone or the region that they are, where they are at. So the brachial artery, radial artery associated with your radius, femoral artery associated with the area of your femur, splenic associated with the spleen, and renal associated with your kidneys. Now, smaller version of arteries are called arterioles. So we go from an artery, or really the aorta, to the major arteries, and then to arterioles. So they are smaller versions of arteries. They are still carrying blood away from the heart. And what we see is that they're super important in contracting and relaxing so that they can regulate the blood pressure. All right. What happened to my vein slide? There it is. So the arterioles are going to divide up into the capillaries. They are very, very, very thin-walled. So the walls are made up only of this type of epithelial tissue. They don't have smooth muscle and all the other features that our arteries, arterioles, veins, and venules have. Capillaries also have valves in them to ensure that the blood continues to go one way. All right, so at those capillary beds, as I mentioned in a previous slide, that's where we're going to have the gas exchange, drop off O2, pick up CO2, at least in the body. Nutrients are dropped off and waste is picked up. All right, so we've done that in the capillaries. Now we have to essentially get the blood back to the heart. Now, if I'm at my brain or my chest or my arms, that's not really that big a deal. When we think about gravity, gravity is this net pull of us towards the earth, and so that blood is going to very easily drain back to the heart. The problem becomes when we're thinking about the blood in our toes and our feet and our ankles and our lower legs, all the way up, we have to get that blood to move. So we know that veins are going to be constructed a bit differently. You're going to see they're going to have less smooth muscle than the arteries. Their walls are going to be thinner and they can hold more blood. Now, arteries and arterioles don't generally have valves, but veins do have valves. Why? Because as we're trying to get that blood to go from our ankles to our calves and up to our thighs and so on, we have to make sure that the blood is sort of continuing to go in the right direction. So think it's a bit like an escalator, right? You wouldn't want the escalator to just stop and suddenly some of the stairs are moving backwards. Now, the major veins of the body, superior and inferior vena cava or vena cava, bringing blood back from our head is going to be the jugulars. Then we have, just like we named brachial artery, we have a brachial vein, a radial vein, femoral vein, splenic vein, and renal vein. There are a lot more veins, but it kind of gives you an idea that where there's an artery, there's going to be a vein. So venules, they are just smaller versions of veins. So if I'm thinking about the whole blood flow, at least to the body, I'm taking blood out the aorta. It's dividing up into the major arteries that split into smaller versions called arterioles that split into these little tiny thin-walled vessels called capillaries. That's where we do our exchange. Then the capillaries are taking blood to venules and eventually to veins and into the two major veins, the inferior vena cava bringing blood back from the lower part of the body and the superior vena cava bringing blood back from the upper part of the body. Next, we're going to move to the subject of the anatomy of the heart. So I have mentioned some terms, and I did that intentionally. The more that we hear the terms, the more we're going to get used to them. So our heart, it is a four-chambered heart. We have two top chambers called the atria, singular atrium. We have a right atrium, a left atrium. The lower chambers are called ventricles. So we have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. Now we have some valves. Again, a mechanism to prevent the backflow of blood. So we have the atrioventricular valves, which are between the atrium and a ventricle. And then we also have a valve that go from the ventricle or the lower chamber into the vessel associated with that chamber. And those are called semilunar valves. This is the end of part 1 of this chapter. I'll see you again soon.